I hold the view that while this is historical, it is also mytho-history, so there is great truth in it, but we need to be careful how we unpack all of that.
Hello and welcome to Sacred Book, a respectful, in-depth conversation of both the Tanakh and the New Testament, from a Christian perspective, which is
Steve,
and a non-aligned perspective, which is myself, Mark. Welcome. We're now at Genesis 11:5. This is one of those segments in which a lot of people will chortle if they want to find fault. And it's to do with, "And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded." Why does the Lord need to come down? Surely he will know what's happening. Obviously, this is not a literal interpretation. There's something else here that's worth investigating. Steve, what are your thoughts?
this is what they call an anthropomorphism, which is in use, i.e., God knew what was happening. He didn't need to actually find out about this, but this is a way of understanding and ascribing human actions to a non-human. How can I convey to you that God was all over this like a bad smell? How can I convey that to you? Well, I give it an anthropomorphism and I ascribe these actions to a non-human in a way that can be understood by a human. That's what it is.
We've said in the past about the way in which language can be used in a metaphorical way. So at the very beginning we said, "Let there be light." Well, for the ancients, light was thought. There is this belief that our thought, our consciousness, is connected with Source or God. So when you read, "And the Lord came down," for some people you could potentially read that as saying consciousness was downloaded into you. In other words, that you're downloading a sense of right and wrong. So when it says the Lord came down, that could be interpreted as God or the collective thinking, hang on, something's not right here. And perhaps could be interpreted that this is how the writer, and we assume it's Moses, was trying to put this across. That a lot of people around the area of Babel at the time thought, yeah, we're going in the wrong direction here. This is pride. This is hubris.
I've read this before and I've looked at it and I thought, the Lord came down. And I think, so, well, is this like a theophany? Is this a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ? I'm not sure that this particular passage is meant to be read as a theophany, because the language behind it is a little bit different to occasions where I do think that there is a clear theophany in play. So he came down, and he came down to see the city, and he came down to see the tower. In terms of picture imagery, what that looked like, you can use your imagination. And it says, which the children of men builded. Children of men is the sons of man in the Hebrew. We've met, haven't we, in Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim. So this is sons of Adam, so sons of man. And the phrase is really useful. We'll gloss over it if we don't think about it a little bit more. What this is doing is showing us that the people that were doing the building, the people that were looking to look out for themselves, were sons of Adam. They were sons of man. They were mortals. They weren't lesser deities. They weren't B'nai Ha-Elohim. They weren't sons of God, like the angelic, the celestial beings. These were sons of man. If I'm right here around the history, the Babylonians claimed that it was lesser deities that built that city. It was celestial beings. It was the gods who built the cities up. The Bible is saying, no. All of this area here, this Babylon, was built by men, mortals. Nothing more, nothing less. So it's setting it up as a polemic again to portray the builders as nothing more than mere mortals, which will be in stark contrast to the other ancient Near East accounts around Babylon being the city of the gods, built by the gods. builded didn't mean that they have completed the building. It means that they had started building. They were in mid-construction. They were in the flow. The slab had been laid, the walls were going up, the roof shout hadn't been done yet, but they were working away through that process. So they were little ants, really, really busy, just building, looking to set themselves up. So it wasn't a completed thing. It wasn't a fait accompli.
The Lord came down and he saw the tower in mid-construction. If they were scattered before the tower was even thought of, then what possible lesson could those people learn? There has to be something to be shown so that you could stop doing it, otherwise there's no lesson to be learned that future generations could refer to.
And you've also got to know when to nip something in the bud.
Divine timing, is it not?
You got to know when to nip it. When you review a situation, there will come a time when you go, right, I'm going to look at this and actually now I need to cull it. Now I need to stop it. So that takes us then up to verse 6. And the Lord said, they are one people and they've all one language, one lip to all of them in the Hebrew, meaning one people all sharing this common language, this common vocab. And it says, and now. They begin to do and now. In the Hebrew, if this, it could be rendered, if this, then now. One people, one language. If they do this, then now they're going to do this. All that they purpose to do will not be withheld from them. And I think that goes to the point where God looks at them and goes, okay, now I need to nip it in the bud.
So what was the actual problem, do you think?
I think the problem we sort of teased out from last time was this is all about pride. This is all about elevating the sense of self above God. My way above God's way. My will above God's will. God commands, I'll do the opposite. It is quite literally the setting up of a secular humanistic society outside of the will and the way of God, and this is what happens. And I'm not an advocate of a theocracy, that's not what I mean. But from a Christian perspective, as soon as you usurp the way of God with the way of a secular society, you're in for a fall, you're in for a problem, and the fall will come. We are seeing this being played out in real time in Western society. Most Western nations that were built up in terms of nation states, I'm not talking about the tribes that were formed there before them, but in terms of the national states, have been built up, and in terms of the government, have been built up on a Judeo-Christian foundation. And that Judeo-Christian foundation is now being jettisoned in favour of a secular, humanistic worldview, my way above the way of God. Our rights, not God's rights. My rights, not God's rights. What always happens in Scripture when that people move eastwards, they move away from the scope of God's blessing, it all crumbles. And we are seeing the crumbling of the West. I don't think that the rise of a secular humanistic society in any Western nation as being beneficial to the overall health of that nation. I can't see that.
What's interesting here is it's talking about one language. Well, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem if it's propagandistic or propaganda, so that it becomes something else. Although this writing is thousands of years old, there's a message here that's relevant today, and it's on ourselves if we ignore it.
You're absolutely right. And if you take the word God out of this, and let's just keep it into a more generic term, as soon as a nation, as soon as a people lose sight of the transcendent, and all their focus is on the secular humanistic level, we lose something. And this is what this is telling us. You move away from the transcendent. You move away for striving for that point that sits outside of you, which you can't rationally explain. You move away from that. You start to go against all of that. You're going to end up in ruins. And you've only got to look back through history, and it is the nations that jettison the belief in the transcendent that end up in ruins. And then it's the nations that grab the transcendent and humanize it to a point of a theocracy where it becomes a terrible oppressive state in the name of a religion, which is just as bad. But there is this balance to be had where you have your freedom, you have your liberties, you have your right to be able to live, but you are constantly recognizing that you are living under a higher power, and your duty is to serve that higher power in terms of the way that you interact with people, the way that you share your love with people, the way that you get alongside people and you help people. And as soon as you become an inward focused self, you end up with tyranny.
And I agree with that. For me, the worst world would be a place where it's just a husk of dry thought, but nothing beyond. We must have the transcendent. And if you consider that you have a mind, well, then we know that there is a transcendent. So go beyond that. We're all connected. And what we're talking about with Genesis 11 is that there are messages here seeded via inspiration of the author that is relevant now. So I agree with you, and I think we should start edging back from the abyss of nihilism and hubris to a world in which we're a bit more humble, we have more humility, and a consideration that there's more to life than just us. Previous episode to this, we talked about the beginning of the creation of this tower, this hubris of building a tower to make a name. So where do you stand then with the historical fact that Christianity did the same? Massive Gothic churches and mega churches today with a name on it.
In the past, the purpose of building a great cathedral or a great church was for the worship of God. It wasn't for us. It wasn't for humanity. It wasn't for man. This wasn't build a tower for us so that we will reach to the heavens. This was, we are in awe of this great God, and this is a temple, this is a church which is being built for him, not to flag us up as brilliant, but to flag him up as brilliant. So I think that the actual start point was very different back in the day. I think that what happens today, where churches are wrapped around a personality, basically the personality, a cult-like personality, and the church gets wrapped around a particular leader, and one particular church in New Zealand that has that very strong leadership that everything pivots and rounds. In my personal view, anything that detracts from the person who is the head of the church is not healthy, and the person who is the head of the church is Jesus. And so the focus for every aspect of every church should be about Jesus. That's it. So if your church is focused on an individual, if your church is focused on a particular franchise, if your church is focused on a particular tag, strapline, you need to look at that carefully. The church is his church. The church belongs to him. And there's nothing wrong in creating something for his glory. But if you're creating it for your glory, then you've got it wrong. You've got it upside down. Takes up to verse 7, doesn't it? Come, let us go down, confound the language, so that they won't understand one another's speech. This is a bit of a play going on here. So God is mirroring what the people do. He's mirroring it in the opposite. They seek to ascend to the heavens. God descends to the earth. They seek to collaborate through their speech. So God then destroys their ability to do that. I noticed in one of my Bibles, it might be the New King James actually, that come let us, the us is capitalized, meaning that the translator believes that this is God himself. Is that an early indication of the diversity of God, like in the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is Echad, the Lord is one, a unity in diversity? Perhaps it is. I'm not saying that it couldn't be that. Or is it relating to the angelic host, the celestial realm that sits with God? Jubilees 10, 22 to 23, which is not in the Protestant Bible. And an angel is recounting this incident. And the angel says, "And the Lord our God said to us," i.e. to the angelic host, "And the Lord went down, and we went with him, and we saw the city and the tower which the sons of men built." It could be either or. I'm not sure that it matters which way you take it, whether you take it that it's God and his crew, or whether it's God in terms of his echad, unity in diversity.
Well, the fact that however high this tower gets, or will become, God still has to come down. It's nowhere near towards what the ancients may have thought was heaven.
Never going to reach God, is it? Just on that as a basic principle alone, it doesn't matter how much you strive as a human to be the best possible human that you can be. And even if you were the best possible human and you weren't even driven there by a place of pride, even as the best possible human, you're never going to reach God's standards. Which is hugely indicative of the whole ministry and message and purpose of Jesus' turning up on the planet. You can't achieve it through any form of work, so God offers it to you as a gift in his Son. That's it.
With that verse, they also say they may not understand one another's speech. I'm quite intrigued by this. Why is that a good thing? Why do you think they need to be confounded? Is it to stop people becoming hubristic? I'm just mindful of videos I've been watching over the last 2 to 3 years. And the videos themselves are quite old now. And it's debates about, here we go, does God exist? But each side is almost speaking as though they don't understand the other. They don't get their concepts, or they don't want to know their concepts. It's almost as though that they don't understand each other. Their language, or the languages, are so confused they can't come to a common consensus. It's language that always divides. There's never common ground, and I appreciate that some people can never see the opposed view. It will always be their own point of view. Language is so important to our belief and how we see the world, and it is confounded to this day. Although what we've been studying, it's all about stopping the hubristic pride of a set of people, this is still with us.
It's quite interesting that from a Christian perspective, Jesus is always going to be the stumbling block. Jesus is always going to be the point of where people fall over. Always Jesus, not God. Jesus will always be the stumbling block. Jesus in John 1:1 is referred to as the Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And what are we stumbling over? Language, the Word. It's a remez. It may be even it's a sot. It's a hint of something yet to come, that there will continue to be stumbling over the Word, i.e. the Logos, and the Word is Christ. And there will continue to be stumbling. There will continue to be problems with people getting their heads together and agreeing on that. God's got to be in the mix. The transcendent has to be in the mix. Otherwise humanity will never be able to lift itself high enough.
Verse 8, and the Lord has scattered them abroad, and they left off to build the city. I'm assuming then this means it was abandoned?
But it had been started. I hold the view that while this is historical, it is also mytho-history, so there is great truth in it, but we need to be careful how we unpack all of that. Because the fact that Babylonia was a very, very early cradle of human civilization, and we know that from history, the study of history. And this is not disputing that. This had all been started. There was stuff that was going on there. It was just started. And it was from this place, Babel, that people were then dispersed. And again, this is a big lesson. Humanity was forced to do what God commanded. God commanded in Genesis 9, go out and do. They didn't do it, and so he scattered them. Whether they liked it or whether they didn't, he did it. Humanity will ultimately be forced to do what God commands, whether they like it, whether they don't. You can either willingly bow, or one day you will bow. In the Christian belief, it says that there will come a time when everybody will bow to the name of Jesus. Everybody will bow, whether you want to or whether you don't. And I guess the message is align yourself as much as possible in every respect of your life as is feasibly possible with the will and the way of God, with the will and the way of the transcendent being, in order to achieve the best possible outcomes. Because one day, if you kick against it for too long, you're going to be shafted anyway. The old naval phrase, one pressed man or one volunteer, which is the best. God did what he wanted to do. And if you're to draw a principle or a lesson from this, it is that God's will not be thwarted. So it doesn't matter how you line up your life or how great you think you are as a leader, as a politician, or whatever you might be, the will of God will play out. It will. That's it.
So we come to the place where a name is given. Babel is obviously linked with Babylon. I'm assuming it's similar in the Hebrew.
Babel is a Hebrew word and it means confusion. It's a tower of confusion. And so it's a bit of a slur, really, when you think about it, because in the Akkadian texts, Babili means gate of God. But in the Hebrew, Babel means confusion. And so we end up with this place of confusion because God is not in the mix. If you understand this from a theological, philosophical, Christian perspective, recognizing that there is a transcendent being, your life will end up in confusion if God is not in the mix.
So this is not just a physical place, this is an interior state that we all share, we all have.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that Jordan Peterson has touched on some of this, in that the pursuit of life should not be about making you happy, but the pursuit of life should be about seeking meaning, seeking purpose. And
Yes.
if you lift your purpose and draw your meaning from something far bigger than you, then your pursuits will rise on a trajectory that I think will stagger you. But if you make your pursuit of life nothing more than about you and your happiness, your well-being, with neglect to those around you, with neglect to the community that you're placed within, with neglect to your fellow human being, you will end up with a lesser life, a life that is less, a life that is confused.
Because you can imagine a modern movie in which we see people on the screen apathetic, they're in ennui. They seem to be lost in a world in which buildings are getting higher and higher and it's more of an urban landscape, concrete jungle. You know, the bonfire of the vanities. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. That the people themselves have taken away their sense of transcendent. They believe science is the answer to everything, when we know, for instance, that plainly that has not been the case. In fact, Churchill wrote about that in his essay, The Legacy of Mass Effects, which he wrote in the 1930s. The more that you make science the God, he said, the more that you're going to feel at variance with the world around you.
Time is not linear, it's cyclical. And what has been is what will be, and we go round in the same patterns. If we are so smart in the 21st century, we should be understanding what these patterns are. Then we should be stepping out of them and going, we know where this is heading, because this is heading for collapse. And I would say, as a westernized individual, I can't speak for every country on the earth, but within the westernized nations, I think the Western world, the Western world view is heading for collapse. I really do. And what it's going to be replaced with, I don't know.
It's amazing how famous this story is. One of the things that doesn't cover much of the page, it's been lifted out and expounded on for centuries, and especially in art. There's so many paintings that we've done over the centuries of this tower. Why do you think that is? Why this one? Why is it so important to people who, even though they potentially have never read the Bible?
But it's completely intrinsic, isn't it, to humanity? Every aspect of humanity, of every culture, every creed, every race, every background, every colour of skin, whatever it might be. You know, this is a universal truism. If you elevate yourself above the transcendent, you're going to fall flat on your face. Because pride comes before a fall. And you need to be really careful about that. And it doesn't matter what creed you are, what colour you are, who you are. You need to learn these lessons. You need to learn them, and you need to learn them well. Even in our common vernacular, we talk about somebody who babbles. They're talking gibberish. Where do we get that from? We get that from Babel. And so when those words are used, you are linking back through the universal ancestral memory system to a time when this all happened.
There's something in the human psyche we haven't really got to grips with.
We've got a lot to learn. I hope that we can learn it.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you, and I'll catch you next time. All going well. Take care, mate. Bye.